In the third chapter of Zechariah, we get this absolutely wild vision. Seriously, it's like a high-stakes courtroom drama set in heaven, and it's packed with symbolism. So let's jump right in and unpack what's really happening. So picture this. The vision drops us right into a heavenly court. It's about 520 BC, which is a super important time for Israel. They've just come back from exile in Babylon, and they're not just trying to rebuild a temple, they're trying to rebuild their entire identity. And right off the bat, the scene is set for a massive conflict. We've got a prosecutor facing off against a divine judge. Okay, so verse 1 lays out our cast of characters for this cosmic drama. First, there's Joshua the high priest. Now, he's not just a guy. He's basically standing in for the entire nation of Israel, carrying all of their baggage. Then you've got Satan, whose name literally means the adversary, and he's there to accuse, to block any chance of restoration. And then, overseeing it all, is the angel of the Lord, who represents God's mercy and absolute authority. Now check this out. The response in verse 2 is immediate. God rebukes Satan. But listen to why. It's not because Joshua is innocent or has earned it. It's because God has chosen Jerusalem. The whole defense is based on God's choice, not on the people's performance. And that leads to one of the most powerful images in the whole chapter, a brand plucked out of the fire. Just imagine a stick that's been pulled from a raging bonfire. It's burnt, it's smoking, but it was saved just before it turned to ash. That's how God sees Israel. They were rescued from total destruction in Babylon, and that rescue job isn't done yet. All right, so now we get to the absolute heart of the vision, which is this incredible transformation that revolves around Joshua's clothes. In verse 3, we get this really stark picture. Joshua is standing there in filthy garments. And we're not talking just a little bit of dirt here. These clothes are a symbol of the nation's spiritual state. They represent all the sin, the unfaithfulness that led them into exile in the first place. And then, verse 4, this is the turning point. The command is given. Take away the filthy garments. It's a total declaration of forgiveness. What's so important is that Joshua does nothing. He just stands there. He can't clean himself. This is purely an act of God's grace. So what do these garments mean? Well, there are a couple of key ways to look at it. From a Jewish perspective, it's a very specific picture of God cleansing the nation of Israel after the exile. Christian theology often sees this as a broader picture of how God's forgiveness works. For anyone, he takes away our sin and gives us his righteousness instead. You can really see this restoration happen in 4 clear steps. First comes the command to take away the sin. Then the declaration that it's gone. Then the promise of something new and clean. And finally, the completion of the whole process. It's very intentional. The whole transformation gets its finishing touch in verse 5 with this fair mitre. This was the official turban for the high priest. And get this, it was engraved with the words, "Holiness to the Lord." Putting that on Joshua's head was the final stamp of approval. It meant he and the whole priesthood were officially back in business, set apart for God's service again. Okay, so Joshua has been completely restored. But it's not over. With this incredible gift of grace comes a serious responsibility. Verse 7 is basically a big if-then statement. The promise of future authority and access to God's presence is tied directly to obedience. The message is pretty clear. Forgiveness is a free gift, absolutely, but the privilege of serving God requires walking faithfully with Him. And just when you think this vision couldn't get any bigger, it suddenly zooms out. We shift from Joshua's restoration right now to a future promise about the Messiah that just changes the game completely. So here in verse 8, we get introduced to this figure called My Servant the Branch. Now, for anyone familiar with the Hebrew Scriptures, this title is a massive flashing sign pointing straight to the Messiah, a future king from David's line who would bring the ultimate salvation. And right on the heels of the branch, verse 9 gives us another huge symbol, the stone. This is another powerful image for the Messiah, who's often talked about as the cornerstone, right? The essential foundation for God's entire plan. Now, this is where it gets really symbolic. This stone has 7 eyes. So what on earth does that mean? Well, both interpretations point to perfection. Some see it as God's complete, all-seeing knowledge of his plan. Others, connected to the New Testament book of Revelation, seeing it as a symbol of the perfect, 7-fold Spirit resting on the Messiah. Then verse 9 drops this bombshell promise. I will remove the iniquity of that land in one day. I mean, wow, This is pointing to something way beyond just Joshua's cleansing. It's a prophecy of a future, ultimate atonement, a single, powerful act that will deal with sin once and for all. And the whole vision wraps up with this just beautiful, peaceful picture in verse 10. This phrase, sitting under the vine and under the fig tree, was an ancient way of saying everything is okay. It's a symbol of total peace, security, and friendship. And it's the ultimate result of God's complete forgiveness and restoration. So we've gone from a tense, heavenly courtroom to an incredible act of grace to a promise of lasting peace. It really makes you think, doesn't it? How does this ancient story about accusation and forgiveness speak to us today in a world that's still looking for that same kind of hope and restoration?